Cultural studies is an interdisciplinary field that emerged in the mid-20th century, primarily in the United Kingdom, but has since spread to various parts of the world. It examines the complex relationships between culture, society, and power, focusing on how meaning, identity, and social practices are produced, circulated, and contested within a given cultural context. The theoretical legacies of cultural studies encompass a wide range of perspectives and approaches. Here are some key contributions and influences. Marxism and critical theory. Cultural studies has roots in Marxist theory, which emphasizes the role of economic relations and class struggle in shaping society. Critical theory, particularly the work of theorists like Antonio Gramsci and the Frankfurt School, influenced cultural studies by highlighting the significance of ideology, power, and hegemony in maintaining social structures. Structuralism and semiotics. Structuralism, as developed by Ferdinand de Saussure and Claude Lévi-Strauss, provided a framework for analyzing the underlying structures and systems of meaning within culture. Semiotics, the study of signs and symbols, has been instrumental in understanding how meanings are constructed and communicated. Post-structuralism and postmodernism. Building on structuralism, post-structuralist thinkers like Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida emphasize the instability of meaning and the ways power operates within discourses. Postmodernism challenged the notion of a singular truth or reality, focusing on the fragmentation and diversity of cultural expressions. Feminism and gender studies. Cultural studies has been deeply influenced by feminist theory, which critically examines the ways in which gender shapes culture and society. It has expanded the analysis of power relations to include the intersections of gender, race, class, and sexuality. Cultural anthropology. Cultural studies draws on insights from anthropology, particularly in the study of cultural practices, rituals, and symbolic systems. Anthropological approaches have provided valuable methods for ethnographic research and understanding cultural diversity. Media and communication studies. Cultural studies has closely engaged with media and communication, analyzing the production, representation, and reception of cultural forms such as television, film, advertising, and digital media. This includes investigations into media ownership, audience reception, and the influence of media on identity formation. Cultural studies of subcultures and popular culture. Cultural studies has examined subcultures, youth cultures, and popular culture as sites of resistance, identity formation, and negotiation of meaning. This perspective challenges the dominant culture and explores the cultural practices of marginalized groups. Overall, cultural studies seeks to critically examine the interplay of culture, power, and social relations, aiming to understand how cultural processes shape and are shaped by society. It encourages interdisciplinary research, challenges dominant narratives, and promotes an inclusive understanding of culture. Representation and identity. Cultural studies focuses on the representation of various identities, such as gender, race, ethnicity, and sexuality, within cultural texts and practices. It explores how these representations construct and reinforce social hierarchies, stereotypes, and power dynamics. Cultural hegemony. Cultural studies draws on the concept of hegemony, as developed by Antonio Gramsci, which refers to the dominance of certain ideas, values, and practices by the ruling class. Cultural studies examines how dominant ideologies and cultural forms are produced, disseminated, and challenged. Cultural production and consumption. Cultural studies investigates the processes of cultural production, including the role of cultural industries, institutions, and creative practices. It also explores the ways in which individuals and communities consume and engage with cultural texts, emphasizing the active interpretation and negotiation of meaning. Globalization and transnationalism. Cultural studies has responded to the challenges of globalization and the increasing interconnectedness of cultures. It examines the flows of people, ideas, and cultural products across borders, as well as the tensions and hybridities that emerge in transnational contexts. Postcolonial and decolonial perspectives. Cultural studies incorporates postcolonial and decolonial theories, which critique the legacies of colonialism and examine the cultural, social, and political implications of colonial encounters. These perspectives highlight the importance of decolonizing knowledge production and centering marginalized voices. Everyday life and cultural practices. Cultural studies places a strong emphasis on the study of everyday life and the ways in which cultural practices, rituals, and routines shape social experiences and identities. It highlights the significance of mundane and ordinary practices in the production and reproduction of culture. Power, resistance, and social movements. Cultural studies analyzes power dynamics and the ways in which marginalized groups resist and challenge dominant ideologies. It examines social movements, activism, and cultural forms of resistance as sites for contestation and transformation. Materiality and embodiment. Cultural studies has increasingly explored the material and embodied dimensions of culture, considering the role of material objects, spaces, and bodily experiences in shaping social meanings and practices. Stuart Hall was a prominent cultural theorist and one of the key figures in the development of cultural studies. His work has had a significant impact on the field and has shaped many of its theoretical perspectives. Here are a few key ideas associated with Stuart Hall. Cultural identity and representation. Hall's work emphasized the construction of cultural identities and the role of representation in shaping those identities. He argued that identity is not fixed or predetermined but is formed through complex processes of representation and negotiation. He explored how media, language, and cultural practices contribute to the formation of identities and how they are contested and transformed. Encoding and decoding. Hall introduced the concept of encoding and decoding in the analysis of media texts. He argued that media messages are encoded with dominant meanings and ideologies, but their interpretation and decoding by audiences can vary. He identified three possible positions: dominant hegemonic reading, negotiated reading, and oppositional reading, emphasizing that the reception of media texts is an active and negotiated process. Culture and power. Hall examined the relationship between culture and power, highlighting how power operates through the production and circulation of cultural meanings. He argued that culture is not neutral but is deeply entwined with power dynamics, social relations, and struggles for dominance. He emphasized the importance of understanding the politics of culture and the ways in which power operates within cultural practices. Representation and difference. Hall contributed to the understanding of representation and difference by challenging essentialist notions of identity. He emphasized that identities are not fixed or homogeneous but are shaped by intersecting factors such as race, gender, class, and sexuality. He advocated for recognizing and valuing cultural differences and critiqued the essentializing tendencies of dominant representations. Cultural studies and Marxism. Hall was influenced by Marxism and sought to integrate Marxist insights into cultural studies. He emphasized the importance of understanding the material conditions of culture and the ways in which economic relations shape cultural practices. At the same time, he expanded the scope of analysis beyond purely economic factors to include questions of race, gender, and identity. New Left and politics. Hall was part of the New Left movement in the UK and was actively engaged in political struggles. He saw cultural studies as a form of political intervention and sought to bridge the gap between academic research and activism. He argued for the need to connect cultural analysis with political movements and to use cultural studies as a tool for social change. Stuart Hall's contributions have been instrumental in shaping the theoretical framework and methodologies of cultural studies. His ideas continue to be widely studied and applied, providing valuable insights into the complex relationship between culture, power, and identity. Importance of popular culture as a site of meaning-making and cultural expression. He explored how popular culture reflects and shapes the values, desires, and aspirations of different social groups. He emphasized the need to study popular culture critically, considering its role in both reproducing dominant ideologies and providing spaces for alternative meanings and resistant practices. Hybridity and cultural flows. Hall examined the concept of hybridity, particularly in the context of globalization and diaspora. He argued that cultures are not static or bounded entities but are constantly changing and influenced by multiple sources. He explored how cultural practices, ideas, and identities travel and intersect, leading to the emergence of new hybrid forms and identities. Politics of representation. Hall highlighted the politics of representation, drawing attention to the unequal power relations involved in the production and circulation of representations. He critiqued the dominant cultural narratives that marginalize and stereotype certain groups while privileging others. He called for more inclusive and democratic modes of representation that give voice and agency to marginalized communities. Identity and difference. Hall contributed to the understanding of identity as a complex and fluid concept. He emphasized that identities are not fixed or predetermined but are constructed and performed in relation to social and cultural contexts. He engaged with questions of identity politics and advocated for an understanding of difference that recognizes and values diverse experiences and perspectives. Cultural studies as a political project. Hall saw cultural studies as a political project that aimed to challenge dominant power structures and contribute to social transformation. He believed in the potential of cultural studies to empower individuals and communities by providing tools for critical analysis and fostering spaces for alternative visions and practices. Stuart Hall's ideas continue to inspire scholars in the field of cultural studies, and his work remains influential in understanding the complexities of culture, power, representation, and identity in contemporary society.